And welcome back, everyone, to this very meager basement, it would seem. Still no word of my squire, but I suspect we might be seeing them at some later point in the evening. Now, after some careful understanding, we have finally procured ourselves a processor. Now this handy-dandy item is sufficient to enable us to multiply our ore refinery. So if I should take some of this iron ore, we might well be able to convert it into 3 dusts. Now these blocks do happen to have the very helpful property that anything on top of them will not despawn, at the very least for a very protracted period of time. But up here I have a redstone signal running into this particular node, which is holding the vast bulk of our red aura. I can therefore release it. It will disseminate into these auras, and it will then be able to travel directly down, where it will rapidly power our processor by means of kinetic conversion, creating free pulverized iron. I've already done some testing with this in regard. But, of course, the greatest issue with this system is that although it works quite effectively, it only processes one thing at a time, and more importantly, it is increasingly expensive to actually get the aura up in the air. So you might wonder why I'm still using red aura, besides perhaps resource conservation. And the answer to that is fairly straightforward. It's that red aura can be propelled upwards using TNT. Now, frankly, TNT has much more useful purposes, but in this case, I believe this will be sufficient for us. So, I shall just continue to chunk that there. Right. So, the special property that is inherent inside of red aura enables us to use a piece of TNT to propel something in the order of 22,000 instances of the aura from a node, be it a humble aura node itself, or in fact a pump. Now, one thing I can also do is turn this into an alternating pump, because having them high in the air makes it mildly more beneficial that way. But now that we've reached the stage where the aura is dribbling down, because it does so in percentages, what I shall actually do is place this here and ignite it in some fashion, which should be fairly straightforward. I have lots of redstone here. Now, this would seem foolish of me, had I not already tested this quite substantially. And so we get a profound increase, as a fair volume of this has already passed out, and regrettably, we still need to find a greater solution to this. It works, it's just not exactly very efficient. But that gets us through our processor. Now, there are other blocks inside of Aura Cascade that we can use that might be of more particular advantage, but I'll get to those in a quick moment. As night is descending upon us, there's a couple of things that we are going to need once more. The most readily available among them being forms of weaponry. So my armor is looking slightly dinged up at the moment. I have found my square repair it right now. So, the most obvious choice for getting a new ranged armament, as any good soldier should have, would be quiverbow. Now, these vary in expense and they vary in potency. We are going to be trying just something fairly straightforward and simple today, and that is a bow with a quiver, so it can hold 256 arrows in a single slot, as well as functioning as the weapon itself. Back, foul beast. You better run. Get back here. As useful as a standing structure is, it's not exactly the most defensible. Now, bow with quiver requires 3 string, 2 free sticks, and 3 leather. Fairly straightforward. Not exactly information that I imagine many people need, but I have dealt with fools before, so who knows. And our string. And there we have it. Now, this device goes back quite a few centuries. It is not exactly recent technology, certainly not of some of the other devices available to us in this particular module of the world, but we are able to fill it with a great many arrows. Now, you can't simply pick them in like that. you actually have to use arrow bundles over here. Hold 8 arrows, 1 string per 8. So, fortunately, if you're doing things right, you will actually have been encountering a great many spiders, for which you can bundle your arrows together with glee. Fairly straightforward, can be done on the field of battle quite readily. And with that, we place 8 arrows into our bow with quiver. Of course, this can hold 256, so you're looking at pretty much a stack of arrow bundles. Very handy. Allows us to significantly cut down on the amount of space that we need to have in our inventories to qualify us as being arched combatants. And of course, they otherwise function just normally like arrows. The next thing that we need to be dealing with, of course, is that this sword, useful as it's been, is getting to be quite low on durability, down at 39 there. Now, swords have always been something of a limited and restrictive weapon. Useful, certainly, but when you're dealing with melee combat, the greatest danger is that your enemy is directly in front of you and is therefore able to stab you back just as easily as you can stab them. So I have a use for some of the scant few diamonds we have yet collected. With the very cheap addition of a pair of sticks, we can create a weapon that has helped mankind through the darkness for centuries. This is a halberd. Now, as you can see, it has slightly more damage than the iron sword, being diamond. It also has slightly better knockback, and it has much lower attack speed, but it also has increased range. So I can attack from a significantly greater range than I could if I was just using a sword. Now, I don't particularly have a test subject available to me right now. Perhaps we can find one. Ah, there looks like one. Always a good day to get rid of more skeletons, though he is in the water. This is less than ideal. I see a zombie this way. Perhaps we can convince him to join us. Oh, he's moving away. Quite probably in fear. Get back here. I can see you on my map. I can know you're around. Where are you? Here, zombie. Ah, there he is. Now, besides looking tremendously impressive, this weapon boasts considerable tactical power. There is our enemy, and here is our range. Considerably more reliable and dangerous than the swords with which you might be accustomed. The halberd is also enchantable just as well, so if you happen to be facing some particular foes with whom it is not wise to get up close and personal, then you might think to invest in a halberd. Especially if they happen to be vulnerable to such classical abilities as Smite, the holy damage of course, or even perhaps Fire, for which Fire aspect also works. And that brings us to our next statement with regards to Aura Cascade, and its colourful take on enchantments. So let's just get rid of this for now. Now, if we examine this and proceed to get ourselves the Kaleidoscopic Enchanter, which will require a fair degree of diamond and obsidian, but we should be able to manage that quite readily, we will be able to get ourselves a Kaleidoscopic Enchanter. Now, this requires power in much the same way as this cascading processor, but as I've demonstrated, we can quite happily manage that. But from there, we're giving it specific colored crystals, we are able to give it particularly more enchantments. This enables us to give such interesting things as lifesteal from green and blue, setting enemies on fire for a short time with yellow and blue, as well as such wonderful things as red and violet, acting as a secondary armor, lowering the damage sustained from enemies. And there are some slight concerns. Various colors do not work well together. Red and green, red and blue granting recoil, green and violet lowering damage. Not the most useful of things. But violet is one of the most useful things, I would say, because combined with blue, it will create an area effect of damage, allowing us to strike numerous targets at once. Now, this will, of course, take quite a while. After all, I have to gather enough diamonds to ensure that we can have enough enough enchanting tables to do this, but nonetheless I feel I'm doing quite well. It's been a very, very, very long while since I've had to investigate in the arcane sciences, and nonetheless I've managed to procure decent knowledge in quite a bit of them, but you know, we have other things to worry about. There are of course ways to make our power self-sustaining, but we'll have to deal with those at a much later date, I fear. So, whilst I'm worrying about that, there is another thing which we must consider, and that is, and I should even think about saying this, fairies. The Fae folk are often thought to be mischievous and dangerous, but we can use our vortex machine to create a ring of binding capable of storing 15 such fairies. Now you may wonder exactly why we need 15 fairies, especially when it takes 50,000 of 4 different colors of aura, as well as some rather expensive blocks. We have a block of gold, block of iron, especially a block of diamond, which will be somewhat difficult to procure. Well, the answer to that is that once we have our diamonds mixed in to make fairy charms of up to 15 again, so 15 times 4, you're looking at 60 top diamonds to get every single slot inside of your fairy charm, we can procure any number of these particular fairies. So, there are such simple things as the Light Fairy, which, when it's dark, places temporary invisible light sources, thereby reducing the necessity that you carry around torches, at the slight cost in a combat situation of leaving a direct trail of where you are. But this one is fairly cheap with just torches. But then there's other things, such as the Debuffer Fairy, which applies a large range of debuffs to surrounding mobs. That simply requires potions of poison. And then there is also additional things such as the Buffer Fairy, which gives you random positive combat buffs, as well as things such as the Extinguisher Fairy, which removes nearby lava and puts fires out. There's things such as the Pusher Fairy, which applies a large knockback to mobs, but not to players. Or indeed damage, but the Stealer Fairy, I feel, will be the most useful amongst these. Will very rarely take the held item of other players and drop it on the ground. Will not remove their armor, but you're talking about a significant advantage when your foe can simply drop their sword. And of course there are other things such as the Shooter, which increases the damage of arrows. Essentially, these are all fays that you can bind to your will and enable you to control the battlefield in a much more great way than might be normally considered from simply arrow and steel. And speaking of controlling the battlefield, that brings us to our final thing, and that is the often neglected use of fireworks. Now, certainly on my battlefields, fireworks see considerable usage. However, we must consider that many consider them to be mildly useless in a combat situation, and this certainly does not harken back to historical accuracy in any fashion. For example, the capacity to send up a flare and transmit information that is vital and crucial to the battle over to your enemies at the speed of light has been used for centuries. It has been something that has been known to be tremendously advantageous, and I am going to require a couple of reeds for this, in order that I might make ourselves some paper. Hello, sir. You don't really fear me, you don't really scare me in the slightest anymore. A few prods with a halberd, and more or less everything drops dead. I will rejoin you when I have managed to discern the location of some sugarcane for paper. Right. Well, I had to travel quite a substantial distance to procure some sugarcane, but needs must. Now, in terms of transmitting information, it may seem somewhat limited, but it is possible to use sugarcanes in the form of a much overlooked... Let's see, there we go. In the form of a much overlooked firework to enable us to transmit certain pieces of information at will across a substantial distance. So in the case of my caravan, none of whom I've managed to see in some time, we should be able to transmit the information of a relay command. And if any of them happen to be around within, a fair distance, certainly travelling again at the speed of light, we may well be able to inform them of exactly where we need them to come. And if we're lucky, we should receive a confirmation command of a green firework to ensure they actually manage to see it. If so, fingers crossed. I think I saw something there. Indeed, I believe there may well be one of our camp members over the hill there. Now, these are somewhat limited, I will not jest in that manner. It is entirely possible that your quarry may well be beyond range, and of course in firing a firework you do somewhat give away your position, which makes them much more useful in terms of spreading information across superior numbers. But it can easily be said that... Ugh. Squire?
My lord?
Where have you been?
Where have you been, my lord?
Do you know where anyone else is? The chef, at least?
The blood moon. It was chaotic. I couldn't have possibly... I have no idea.
I had to find a new horse because you ran off.
I didn't exactly run off, sir.
I can see that. You're in a tree. Now, speaking of horses, you've got work to do. Come along.